I want to begin by recounting another time, an inflection point in United States history. It was about 40 years ago in Anniston, Alabama, when a group no more numerous than this group here sought to desegregate buses and facilities in the South, a place called Anniston, Alabama. They were very brave and courageous, and at that time it was thought, well, there's going to be segregation forever. It's been here since Jim Crow and after Reconstruction. Why are you going to be risking your lives, your liberties, your friends by coming to Anniston, Alabama, a small place of which many people knew nothing, just in hopes that you will be able to end a century of racial discrimination. But that group decided, no, they were going to take the risk. They had witnessed a few years earlier Rosa Parks saying, enough is enough, I'm not sitting in the back of the bus. I'm not going to be suffering the indignity of suggesting I'm second class because of the color of my skin. And at Anniston, Alabama, there were the typical brutality of the Alabama police at the time, signified Bull Connor, Jim Clark, those who obtained greater notoriety as the Voting Rights Act moved forward. But these people, with their courage, they changed history 40 years ago. Anniston, Alabama. They were no different than you. They were no different than you. And what they represented was the principle of Andrew Jackson. What's a majority? One man or woman with courage and devotion to a principle that rises above self-interest. That was just 40 years ago. And I'm suggesting, and I do write in my book, American Empire, we are at a similar inflection. You can change history. It's why you're here today. You're endowed with certain intellectual faculties, intelligence, honor, understanding of the history of the American enterprise, which, say, is built upon just ordinary men and women deciding that they would fight and give and risk that last full measure of devotion for something higher than self. And of course, that was the story of the American Revolution, whether it's the Battle of Bunker Hill or Paul Revere's Ride, celebrated by William Henry Longfellow, or whether it's Emerson's Concord Bridge, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flags to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world. And we celebrate them. If you've gone to Lexington Green in Massachusetts, you'll see the first monuments to those who gave birth for the first time in history to a country based upon the idea of self-government, that we are all born with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that governments are established to secure those rights. It's not established to create empires, not established to grow bigger, but to secure those unalienable rights. Now I want to jump forward after that excursion into history till today. Why is it, in my judgment today, we encounter the same kind of challenge that was encountered in 1776, 1960, and at other inflection points in history? Because I think we, as all other empires that have fallen to ruination from arrogance, have failed to learn from the past and to embrace and continue very vibrant the values, the emblems, the creed of the Republic. And what I want to do in the next half hour is to explain how I perceive the abandonment of our most cherished ideals as a republic and what we can do to try to recapture those. It has been the history of the prior 73 empires to exert power, domination for its own sake, to seek to control the world for its own sake. It's a very primal motivation. It's not really to control oil wells or otherwise. The Roman Empire, for example, was at first fought to defend itself. Then it fought to defend allies. Then it invented allies to defend. Then it invented insults to its pride in order to fight wars, until it finally collapsed. And those are the earmarks of empire. When you have a country that's very powerful, the superpower, no one can oppose it, there's this inclination to think, oh, we are the embodiment of all virtue. We're the exception to the rule of genetics and the ordinary depravity of human nature. It's what our founding fathers referred to in trying to architect a system of government that would seek to elicit the better angels of our nature rather than to succumb to absolute power and tyranny. And inclination of any, whether a single person or majority, to try to cram their conception of virtue down other people's throats. That's what the founding fathers repudiated. And my book, American Empire Before the Fall, traces the trajectory of the United States from the Mexican-American War onward. That is a continual expansion and degradation, if you will, of the virtues of a republic, which were captured in an 1821 July 4th address of John Quincy Adams. He was then Secretary of State. He became president later on, but he was there at the founding. He was at the feet of Washington and Adams. He was the son of John Quincy Adams. More importantly, the son of Abigail Adams, who was far more responsible for his education and his rise and ascent to the presidency. We often forget that Abigail Adams wrote John at the convention to declare our independence, don't forget the women, which they immediately forgot. Till 50-some years later at Seneca Falls, that then gave birth to the women's franchise movement. But let us compare today with John Quincy Adams' July 4th address, where he said, "The glory of a republic is freedom and liberty. The glory of an empire is domination and dominion." He said the United States was to be remembered for the triumph of the mind, for the triumph of reason. He said that we gave our sympathies abroad to movements for independence, democracy, and otherwise, but we fought only for our own. Because, he said, we understood that time in 1821 that once you become involved in constant warfare, you destroy your own republic. All power goes to the executive. It brings in secrecy, violations of due process, taxation, all the things that a republic disavows. And he acknowledged, he said, we could be dictatress of the world, but we would destroy the republic in the process. And he enjoined the American people to adhere to these republican virtues that were practiced at the outset if it wished to thrive and grow into the greatest republic whose influence abroad would be profound, but it would be the influence of example, not democracy at the end of a bayonet. And when he spoke, he had history on his side. When the revolutions in Central and Latin America exploded, the early 1800s, throwing off the yoke of Portuguese and Spanish imperialism, the United States did not intervene. The United States did not send troops to try to dictate the outcome. It remained strictly neutral. Sympathy was in favor of the rebels, Simon Bolivar, no troops. We did not even recognize the new republics until Spain and Portugal did. So when John Quincy Adams was speaking, he wasn't inventing, he wasn't engaging in a rewrite of history as we witnessed in George Orwell's 1984. This was the authentic history of the United States of America. Unfortunately, as the founding generation died, and Quincy Adams was the last to occupy the presidency, the United States began to lose a grip on its founding principles. And it began with the theory of manifest destiny, late 1830s, early 1940s. Now, the first question to ask is, manifest to who? This was the manifest destiny of the United States, was to traipse all over the continent. It wasn't yet intercontinental or interplanetary yet, would come later on. But over all the continent, we had a manifest destiny to dominate and bring our ideas of government, economy, and others to those who were not quite as enlightened as us. And if they didn't see the virtue in it, then we would coerce them into understanding how great it was to emulate the United States. And it was this idea of manifest destiny that again was the first shattering of Republican principles, and it was opposed by who? One was then John Quincy Adams, who after he left the presidency in 1828 became a member of Congress. And if we can just pause for a moment and think about that in terms of how empires exalt the presidency and reduce Congress to a cipher. Could anyone imagine today a president joining Congress after his tenure expires? It would be ridiculous. But at that time, it was not viewed by John Quincy Adams as an insult to his stature to become a member of the Congress of the United States, the most representative institution of the government. And who else was opposed to the Mexican-American War? Abraham Lincoln, correct. The spot resolutions. He was not squeamish about fighting when you needed to fight. That's those who surrendered to Appomattox. But he understood that it was the Mexican-American War that began the crowning, the apotheosis of the president, with authority either to lie his way into war or to unilaterally conduct war. And it was Polk, then President Polk, who lied to the American people and to Congress, insisting that Mexican troops had killed an American soldier on American soil and had begun the warfare that justified his beseeching Congress for authorization to fight the Mexican-American War, which was given. Polk also, as anticipating the United States today, he fantasized about a British or French protectorate in Mexico. They were going to establish monarchy here, right adjacent, make one of our neighbors. Monarchy. Of course, it was total concoction. But it was thrown forth as a justification why we had to fight the war in Mexico now to prevent a future war against France or Great Britain.